After a complaint about racial profiling against the Halifax Regional Police was dismissed, Kayla Borden filed an appeal into that decision with the Police Review Board. In the wee hours of July 2020, Borden was arrested and then detained in a traffic stop after her vehicle was mistaken for another car that had allegedly been speeding with no license plate, its headlights turned off, and driven by a white man in a baseball cap. After hearing testimonies from over half a dozen officers involved in Borden's pursuit and arrest, a 3-member Police Review Board panel upheld the initial decision and determined that racial profiling was not a factor. That decision was filed this past May of 2023. Last week, Borden and her lawyer, Asaf Rashid, appeared in Halifax Court for a judicial review hearing into the Police Review Board's decision. Here to talk about what all that means going forward is Kayla Borden and her lawyer, Asaf Rashid. Thanks for joining me, you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
So, first question: what in fact is a judicial review or a judicial review hearing? What can you tell us about last week's hearing? Is your ultimate goal, Kayla, to eventually sue the Halifax Regional Police for monetary damages, or is that something completely different from your judicial review? What can the two of you tell me about that?
Okay, sure. As far as your judicial review, what that is, anytime a government person makes a decision, then a person who's not happy with that decision can appeal it. Sometimes you have an internal appeal process, like in this case, someone complains about treatment by police, they can complain to the Police Review Board. But if not happy with that decision, then that decision can be reviewed to a higher court, in this case the Nova Scotia Supreme Court, for a judicial review. And the higher court, the Nova Scotia Supreme Court, reviews that decision for whether it was the right decision based on, in this case, whether it was a reasonable decision or not. And so I had to file an application for judicial review where I listed grounds of review of what I thought was wrong with the decision and what I felt was wrong with the initial decision by the review board was that they determined that the arrest was not unlawful. In other words, that it was a lawful arrest. Determined that there was no racial profiling, and determined also that she did not have a right to counsel during that entire process that she went through.
So the judicial review, that won't in fact reverse the decision, or could it?
Well, what could happen from a positive decision on judicial review is it would be referred back to the review board again for a new decision.
Okay. And I mean, with this case, there was a lot of details involved in that. So, Kayla, the officer who initially spotted your vehicle, he told in his testimony, he said that he couldn't tell whether or not you were, in fact, black or white. The officer who spotted the initial vehicle, who they were, looking to track down, who was speeding with no headlights on, no license plate, he said that he saw that driver, at least from his perspective, was a white man. But that he didn't relay that information when over the radio, that it was a white man. He didn't relay the race. Now, it might not be unreasonable to think that for most people, black, white, police officer, or civilian, if they see a black person doing something, that they might in fact, relay that in their description, that it was a black person. In this case, I guess they're saying it wouldn't have mattered anyway because they couldn't tell that you were black when they ended up spotting your vehicle. But should, I guess, the race be mentioned no matter if it's a white person or a black person, if you can tell, if it was a black person or a white person, even though it might not have made a difference in this case?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they definitely should be describing all the details of a person that is, supposedly at risk to the public, who they're exactly looking for. So they should be relaying that to their peers to actually look for the person or help them look for the person that they're looking for.
Do you know or have any way of telling if it had been a black person driving the vehicle, whether or not they would have in fact relayed that information initially?
100%. 100%. I feel like, in any incident, they would relay that over the radio. Right. Why wouldn't you if you're looking for a specific person?
All right. We were speaking a bit before we started. For people who might, be immediately dismissive of any and all accusations of, racism, racial profiling, anti-Black racism. Will they read this decision and maybe take that as a bit of a moral victory, or should that even matter? Should we even care about that?
I could say something about that. So as far as the event of the day and what ended up happening, there was on the police radio conveyed to all the officers who were involved a description of the initial vehicle, that there was one officer who'd spotted this vehicle. It was a dark color, described it as a Pontiac, and described that it was a he, described that it had a temporary license sticker on the rear side, passenger side window, and that the person had a baseball hat on, and did not describe the person as Black, which typically, if a person is Black, the police will include that in the description.
And in this case, the person was white.
Yeah, so there are all these detailed descriptions of what the vehicle and drivers that police were actually looking for, actually what this person and the vehicle actually looked like. And it was relayed a couple of times on the radio, and that information was recorded by the dispatch. And even though all these details were present, once Kayla was stopped and surrounded by police, they didn't bother to review the details that they had. They didn't bother to check in with dispatch about what the description was. They didn't care to look for this, whether the vehicle, Kayla's vehicle, had a temporary license sticker on the driver's side rear window, which it didn't. They didn't look for these details. They merely beelined to arrest her. They just rushed ahead right to the arrest without reviewing details. And at the review board, they claimed that they didn't have time to look for these details or check with the dispatch because they treated it as if it was some urgent situation where there was some immediate danger to police. But when any of these officers who were present and outside of their vehicles that were involved in this stop of Kayla and the arresting officer, none of them could actually give a single example of any danger whatsoever. So my assertion at the review board, which they rejected, and then I said this was an error for the Nova Scotia Supreme Court to review, was that the police, they had somehow suggested that there was some danger when there was none.
Well, I guess their argument about the danger would be that if this was in fact the person who the initial officer initially spotted, that this person was driving, with no license plate, and I think I remember him saying something that, given that time of night and where it was at, there's usually alcohol involved in instances like that, and they took off speeding, and they never ended up catching that person. So I'm assuming that's where I guess the danger factor would come in. Now, the initial officer who spotted the initial vehicle, I guess he showed up on the scene, saw that the car had a license plate, and that's when he radioed in that it was the wrong car, and he took off, and that's when you went from being arrested to detained while they collected your information. Do I have that part correct?
I mean, yeah, I'm assuming that's what they're saying, but I'm also like, if I was the person that they were looking for, why would I be stopped at a red light if I see a police vehicle? Wouldn't that person still be fleeing from the police if they see them?
So you stopped not because you saw the police, but because you were at a red light?
I was at a red light, okay. Yeah.
And they just so happened to be there waiting for you, you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so I guess, another one of your complaints was that you weren't given your rights or read your rights. I guess in the decision that I read, they said that when they determined that you were the wrong person, that you essentially went from being arrested or being placed under arrest to simply being detained, and I guess that would eliminate them from having to read you your rights. Is that, do you buy that?
Well, I think in this particular case, it's not your typical kind of a stop where someone is, let's say, stopped for speeding or something like that. This began with a wrongful arrest, and then Kayla was released, and then they didn't just let her go at that point. They continued to detain her on this suspicion of her having committed a Motor Vehicle Act infraction, which allegedly was not having lights on.
And you dismissed that detail, is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I had my lights on.
They said that they reviewed or observed you turn your lights on I guess, a while into the pursuit. You didn't realize you were being followed, but I guess on the Magazine Hill after coming from Bedford, they say is when you turn your lights on. You say they were automatic lights. How does that, where does that
Yeah, I mean, in a vehicle that has automatic lights, you just put on auto, right? So, I mean, for me not to be driving with my lights on from my cousin's house to where I guess they arrested me, like, there was a police officer that drove past me before that, like off of, I guess, the Bedford Highway. Okay. So if my lights were off then, why didn't I get pulled over then?
All right. And paint us the scene. I mean, there was how many police on the scene? How fast did it happen? What was your reaction? Just for folks who might
Yeah,
not
honestly,
be aware.
I only seen the cops that were in front of me that were in the paddy wagon, that were like at the lights that were, I thought was gonna drive past me. And then once an officer came, I guess from behind me, I felt like it was behind, or not felt like it was from behind me, came up and was like, put your hands on the steering wheel. And I didn't know where they're coming from. Exactly. I didn't even know that the cops stopped in front of me. It was all just like, it was so fast. But like once the officer got me outside of my vehicle, there's like 7 police vehicles surrounded around me, around my vehicle.
Right. And so what can both of you guys tell me, I guess, about what more can you tell me about the judicial review, specifically was it a hearing that took place last week? What sense do you get from it, how it went, and where are we going with this?
Well, with that, so yes, it was a hearing that happened on January the 11th, and the issues to be determined were, as I mentioned earlier, was the arrest lawful, was racial profiling a factor, and then was the right to counsel, was it something that she was entitled to, and as far as the lawfulness of the arrest, under Section 9 of the Charter, everyone has a right not to be arbitrarily detained. And in this kind of a case where it was entirely the wrong vehicle, totally different description of the vehicle they were actually looking for, different looking person, the police should have reviewed the details that they had available to them. In order to make a lawful arrest, police have to have what's called reasonable and probable grounds. And my argument was that they didn't have that to make the arrest, because if they reviewed the available information, it should have told them that they had the wrong vehicle and the wrong driver. Because they had that information available to them, all they had to do was check with the dispatch, or they could have waited for the officer who made the initial observations to show up, who immediately said it's the wrong vehicle.
Is that based specifically off of the license plate?
The license plate's a key factor. I mean, it would have taken 2 seconds to have just looked around, checked if Kayla's vehicle had a temp license plate sticker on the side, and they could have made the determination right there, it's the wrong vehicle. So if the police have information available to them that demonstrates to them that they have the wrong suspect, then that person shouldn't be arrested. And my submission was that was the case. They had right in front of them, they had a person who was on his way, and the officer made the initial observations. They didn't wait for him. They just rushed to arrest Kayla due to racial profiling. They sensed this danger that wasn't actually there because Kayla's black, and it's an unconscious bias a lot of police have, where they will immediately, as soon as they see a black person, assume some criminality or dangerousness, and then suggest that there's some dangerous factor that means they have no choice and they immediately have to arrest without reviewing the actual details they have, which if they did, they wouldn't have made the arrest. So the racial profiling factor is also a part of someone's right to not be arbitrarily detained, where if racial profiling is a factor that the police are using, even unconsciously, to decide whether to make an arrest, it's not a lawful arrest. If racial profiling factors into police making arrest, in this case it was a wrong arrest, then that's not a lawful arrest. So that was how I asserted that issue, is that they assumed dangerousness, they rushed to make the arrest. They didn't have the basis to rush to make that arrest because there was no danger. They should have waited for that other officer to show up. They should have reviewed the details, and they should have not made that arrest. Only due to the impact of racial profiling did they bulldoze ahead essentially and make arrests where they shouldn't have.
And so what happens next with the judicial review process specifically, and what final thoughts do you have to share about this? What would you want people to know about this, maybe who were just hearing about it for the first time?
Well, we're waiting for a decision now, and the decision will come out as soon as possible. That's what we were told. I don't know what that means. It's unclear exactly when the decision will come out, whenever the judge, it's the Honorable Justice Boudreau, who will be making the decision. and it will be whenever that decision is written, because it'll be a written decision. So I don't have a timeline.
What are you hoping comes from it, and what do you expect might come from it? Do you have high hopes, low expectations? Or do you have any expectations because you just have to hurry up and wait, sort of thing?
That's a very good question. Like, I don't know. It's really hard to say, especially like when when we're sitting in front of a judge that could never ever walk in my shoes as a Black woman.
This is a white judge?
Yes, the judge is white, and also like even the lawyers that are like protecting HRP, and like the lawyers or the police lawyers, like they, I don't think that they would ever understand or realize, I guess, that impact of or even thinking about like how anti-Black racism has been installed in like every system in every culture. I don't think that they see that as a factor because the system is built against us.
All right. And lastly, Asaf, I think I read that you said that part of the decision, there was talk about the officers maybe being compensated or something like that, and you thought that could deter people from complaining in instances like this in the future. Do I have that right? What can you tell us?
I think I do recall when we were talking about that. That was after the Police Review Board decision. Is that right?
It was something that I read, so we hadn't spoke about that, but I'd read about that since you and I last spoke.
Yeah. So at the Police Review Board, there was one of the requests by the lawyers for the police was that costs be awarded if they had won, but then they withdrew that before. So that ended up no longer being an issue. Now, in this case, both sides have asked for costs. They asked for costs, and so did we.
Why is that an issue, though, for the public? Why would that deter people from, making a complaint in the future?
That was an issue that I raised with regards to the Police Review Board. That my concern was in requesting costs in that proceeding, that it could have a chill effect on others making complaints. If anyone in the future made a complaint about an unlawful arrest, particularly racial profiling is involved, they could feel afraid to do so if they might have to pay the costs, particularly if it's seen that the review board simply is going to be totally dismissive of any complaint about racial profiling.
And that would be potentially you paying their costs. Is that
That's correct?
Right. Well, I guess from here we just have to hurry up and wait, I guess, from what you're telling me. Thank you for coming and joining us. You'll come back, give us an update.
Yeah, for sure.
As per the updates coming in, I suppose.
For sure. I also just want to add this last piece. If they don't see this as an unlawful arrest, why were they trying to resolve this behind closed doors? They asked me 2 to 3 times to resolve this behind closed doors, but I told them no.
Resolve behind closed doors meaning what?
I don't know, because I did not accept that offer.
Okay.
I want people to know that that this can't continue to happen. Like, we need to continue to speak up. I know that a lot of unlawful things has happened to our community, and especially the Indigenous community as well. But I feel like we need to speak up to figure out how we can make these changes happen.
It seems to me like, if nothing else, you wanted the details of this to be on the record, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, Kayla and Asaf, thank you again for joining me. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, the offer to resolve it behind closed doors, that was, I think, before I was involved.
Yeah.
But just a big picture sense, this to me was a case of where it was so obvious that the police had arrested the wrong person, and that they skipped past their normal procedures to make the arrest when it could have been avoided. And to me, it's very clear that it was racial profiling as a subconscious factor that led to them rushing to arrest Kayla. And I think a lot of people are watching this and seeing whether they think that the system is even capable of making a right decision as far as when a person has been unlawfully arrested, particularly Kayla's case, a Black person being unlawfully arrested. Does the justice system have the ability to make a right decision in that kind of a case? I think people are watching for that.
Well, thank you again very much, Kayla Borden and Asaf Rashid.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Community Update is brought to you with the support of the following organizations, businesses, and individuals: Heritage Canada, Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations, Cactus, Bailey-O, M4 Media, Flenjor Foods, Sheyi Ajetamobi, and Shokoto.